So this one time, my sister took some medication for asthma, and it made her sick. I mean, it was totally fake, and it was really scary for my whole family. I never heard of anything like this before, but guess what? She's not the only one who's been given fake medication. Lots of people end up with phony pharmaceuticals, and some of them even die. Okay, so here's a picture of a phony pharmaceutical. See? It looks just like the real one. And that's the topic of my speech today. Graham Jackson says fake drugs include things like boric acid, talcum powder, chalk, and even arsenic. In 2008, 81 people in the U.S. died from a phony pill. All over the world, 700,000 people will die this year. Think about how many people that is. That's a scary number. You don't want to be one of those people. One reason there are so many phony drugs out there is that there are people who make a lot of money from them. More money, in fact, than from dealing heroin. So, as you can see, the problem is only going to get worse. One website said that criminals make $75 billion a year. We need to stop these phony pharmaceuticals from hurting any more people. My plan is to pass a bill and get it through Congress. Firstly, criminal penalties should be increased. I mean, you can kill someone with fake drugs. Secondly, the government should have the power to get phony pharmaceuticals off the street. Thirdly, the FDA should check all the drugs everywhere to see if they're real or fake. We have health inspectors for food. Why not for drugs? Finally, as all the experts agree, we need to have track and trace technology. I know this plan sounds pretty complicated, but trust me, it will work. That's what all my sources say. So we really need to pass this bill. We need to tell our congressmen and congresswomen, let's do that so we can get phony pharmaceuticals off the streets. It's important to solve this problem. That's the conclusion of my speech. Thank you. Take a look at these two pills. Do you notice a difference between them? How about these two? Do you see a difference here? How about these? To the naked eye, these pills are indistinguishable. But at a chemical level, they are very, very different. In each case, the pill on the left is real. It will help you get better. The pill on the right is counterfeit. It will not help you get better. In some cases, it may even kill you. Catherine Eban, author of Dangerous Doses, How Counterfeiters Are Contaminating America's Drug Supply, explains that phony pharmaceuticals are drugs that have been diluted. Drugs in which the active ingredient has been replaced with something else. Or drugs that have been relabeled to appear as something stronger than they truly are. Taking a phony pharmaceutical means that you do not receive the medicine you need to get better, and the results can be deadly. I first became aware of this issue after my younger sister received a phony drug for her asthma last summer. Fortunately, the error was discovered before it caused her any lasting harm. But I've been concerned about the issue ever since, and I did a great deal of research on it for this speech. As a result, I'm convinced that we need to take action now to combat the problem of phony pharmaceuticals. Later in my speech, I'll share with you my plan for curbing the spread of these dangerous drugs. Let's start by taking a look at the problem. Phony pharmaceuticals are dangerous because of the health risks they pose. According to Graham Jackson, editor of the International Journal of Clinical Practice, counterfeit drugs include ingredients such as boric acid, leaded road paint, floor polish, shoe polish, talcum powder, and cement powder. But that's not all. There's also brick dust, chalk, nickel, and arsenic. Ingesting too much boric acid or floor polish can make you sick. Leaded road paint and arsenic can kill you. In one highly publicized case, 81 people in the United States died in 2008 because they took a counterfeit version of the blood thinner heparin. As reported by CNN, the phony heparin was originally manufactured outside the United States using a cheap sulfate that proved deadly. After slipping past all regulatory checks, it ended up in the United States with tragic results. The U.S. government's Bureau of International Information Programs estimates that 700,000 people around the world will die this year from phony pharmaceuticals, almost 3 times the number of people who live here in Madison. In fact, Roger Bate of the American Enterprise Institute reports that trafficking in counterfeit drugs has become one of the world's fastest growing criminal enterprises. Phony pharmaceuticals are so widespread that they have become big business. The FDA estimates that they will bring in close to $75 billion in revenue this year alone, up from $40 billion only a few years ago. Tom Kubik, head of the Pharmaceutical Security Institute, told USA Today in September 2010 that criminals can make more money in counterfeit drugs than they can in heroin. Given the rewards of the counterfeit drug trade, the problem will only get worse in the coming years unless we take steps to bring it under control. The solution I propose is similar to House Resolution 2726, which is under consideration by the U.S. Congress. There are 4 steps to the solution. First, criminal penalties for drug counterfeiters should be increased from 3 years in prison, which is the current limit, to no limit at all. If a drug peddler kills someone with phony pharmaceuticals, the punishment should fit the crime. Second, the Food and Drug Administration should have the authority to recall prescription drugs. Right now, the FDA can encourage drug manufacturers to issue a recall, but it has no power to issue a recall on its own. To get phony pharmaceuticals off the street, recall authority needs to rest with a central agency that will act quickly and uniformly. Third, the FDA should be given the resources for spot checking the chemical makeup of prescription medication. We have health inspectors for food. Why not have inspectors for prescription drugs? Fourth, legitimate drug manufacturers should be required to implement track and trace technology. As explained in the New York Times, this technology stamps each bottle and pill with a unique code tied to a secure, centralized database. The code allows pharmacies and distributors to determine whether drugs are legitimate or phony, plus the route the drugs took to get to store shelves. Representative Steve Israel of New York, sponsor of House Resolution 2726, says this bill will ensure that the domestic drug supply chain is secure for every American. It will crack down on counterfeiting and increase the penalties for the outlaws who are compromising our health. The time has come for Congress to pass this vital legislation. In conclusion, phony pharmaceuticals are pervasive and dangerous. By implementing the solution I have outlined, we will be able to control this public health menace. You have the right to know that the medication you're taking is real. You have the right to know that your next trip to the drugstore will be a safe one. And you have the right to know that what you see is what you get.
Jose Morales was sleeping on cardboard boxes in a garage in Compton, California. Before the sun came up, he would walk to a nearby bus stop where he would ride the bus for 2 hours to the Los Angeles International Airport where he worked as a janitor. On 2 occasions, he was mugged while waiting for the bus. Working 40 hours a week for minimum wage, this was the best he could do. But then Jose's situation improved drastically. As Robert Pollan, an economist at the University of Massachusetts, reports, Jose received health insurance and a 36% raise. He had enough to rent his own apartment and to buy a car. It all happened because Jose started to receive the living wage. What is the living wage, you ask? Well, it's not the same as the minimum wage. The minimum wage is set by Congress and is the same in every part of the country. The living wage goes beyond the minimum wage. As the Wall Street Journal reported in August 2013, the living wage is tied to the local cost of living and can vary from location to location. Its purpose is to help workers and their families meet the most basic standard of living, even when that standard of living is higher than the minimum wage. I first heard about the living wage last semester in my econ class. After researching it for this speech, I've come to the same conclusion as numerous economists and public policy researchers. The living wage can help the working poor without adversely affecting businesses or the health of the economy. That's why we need to pass federal legislation mandating a living wage that can help people secure the basic necessities of life. So let's first look at the difficulties faced by the working poor, and then we'll look at the living wage solution. Poverty remains a significant problem in the United States, in part because the wages have not kept up with the cost of living. According to a recent study of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than 46 million Americans live in poverty. Of these 46 million, 10 million are referred to as the working poor, people who are employed at least 27 weeks a year and who are still stuck in poverty. Of these 10 million people, half, 5 million, are employed full-time. They work 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, but they still can't make ends meet. How can that be? It happens in part because of the federal minimum wage. Since 2009, the minimum wage has been $7.25 an hour. If you calculate that, someone working full-time would earn just over $15,000 a year. For an individual, that's just above the poverty line. The problem comes when there are 2, 3, or 4-person households, as with a single mother trying to squeak by. It's almost impossible to raise a family on $15,000 a year. Another problem is that the federal minimum wage doesn't change until Congress changes it. And we all know how long it can take for Congress to do anything. In fact, it took Congress more than 10 years to raise the minimum wage from its previous $5.25 to its current rate of $7.25. As a result, millions of workers are still earning in 2008 what they had earned in 1998. The result was a lost decade of wage growth, according to the State of Working America, published in 2012 by the Cornell University Press. The same book predicts another lost decade if we don't take action soon. So what can we do? How can we help make sure that people who work full-time earn enough money to lift themselves and their families above poverty level? One way is to implement a federally mandated living wage. The first city in America to institute a living wage was Baltimore in 1994. Since then, the living wage movement has spread to more than 140 jurisdictions. However, as David Newmark, Matthew Thompson, and Leslie Coyle reported in a 2012 issue of the Journal of Labor Policy, most living wage laws cover only people who work for companies with government contracts. At best, only 1% of workers in a city receive the living wage. It's time to cover everyone who works full-time, and to do so with the National Living Wage Law. Here's how such a law would work. First, we would calculate the living wage for every county in the United States. To do that, we'd use the living wage calculator created by Amy Glassmeyer, a professor of urban studies and planning at MIT. Based on this calculator, the living wage in Chicago, my hometown, for this year would be $10.48 per hour. In Dallas, it would be $9.29. In New York, it would be $12.75. As you can see, there is large variation between the cost of living in different parts of the country. A national living wage would account for these variations. Second, we would tie the living wage to the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index tracks the price of goods and services in different parts of the country. As the Consumer Price Index increases, the living wage would increase at the same rate. In Chicago, the Consumer Price Index rose by 2% last year. The living wage in that city would then go from $10.48 an hour to $10.69 an hour. And it would cover everyone who works full-time, whether they work for the government or in the private sector. In this way, we can ensure that wages for everyone keep up with the cost of living. As you might expect, there is opposition to instituting a living wage policy. Those who oppose the living wage offer two main arguments. First, they argue that the living wage would be too costly for businesses. But that's not what Jeff Thompson and Jeff Chapman, researchers at the Economic Policy Institute, found. After surveying existing living wage laws, they found that the increased cost of wages is offset by higher productivity and lower employee turnover. Happier workers means stronger businesses. The second argument of critics is that the living wage will lead to fewer jobs. But again, the research doesn't bear this out. A 2011 study in Economic Development Quarterly by T. William Lester, a professor at the University of North Carolina, found that living wage laws do not have a large negative impact on employment. In a 2012 study, Lester found that living wage laws can actually create jobs of higher quality. In addition to being good for workers, a living wage law can benefit businesses and the economy in general. In conclusion, the time has come to pay American workers a wage that will keep up with the cost of living. We need a federally mandated living wage. In a time of massive corporate profits and skyrocketing executive pay, those at the bottom of society deserve to advance along with those at the top. Those like Jose Morales, who I mentioned at the start of my speech, deserve a better future. Everyone thinks that working here at the airport we must earn a lot of money, Morales says. It's not true. But at least now, with the living wage, we can hold our heads up high. And that's something everyone working a full-time job should be able to say.
It's your constant companion. It's in your pocket, in your bag, in your hands, or against your head. You use it at home, in class, at the gym, before you go to sleep at night, and first thing when you wake up in the morning. I'm talking, of course, about your cell phone. According to my class survey, everyone in this room has a cell phone, and all of us use it dozens of times every day. But what if your constant companion is dangerous? What if it's hazardous to your health? Evidence is piling up that long-term use of cell phones can lead to tissue damage, tumors, and even brain cancer. Given that there are well over 4 billion people worldwide using cell phones, we're looking at a problem of potentially staggering magnitude. According to Devra Davis, epidemiologist and author of the 2010 book, Disconnect, The Truth About Cell Phone Radiation, we may be watching an epidemic in slow motion. I'd never thought much about the possible perils of cell phones before I saw a CBS News report on the subject earlier this year. But doing extensive research for this speech made me realize that cell phones do in fact pose a danger to our health. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to try to persuade you to abandon your constant companion. I still use mine on a regular basis, and I probably always will. But I do hope to persuade you to make one simple change in the way you use your cell phone. A change that will protect your health and could even make the difference between a long life and premature death. But first, let's look more closely at the health risks posed by cell phones. Those risks stem from the fact that cell phones emit small amounts of radiation that over time can damage tissue. Every time you use your cell phone, you expose yourself to that radiation. The amount is minuscule in comparison to that given off by X-ray machines, about 1/1,000,000th of the intensity. However, Ronald Herbermann of the University of Pittsburgh Cancer Institute explains that the problem with cell phone radiation is not how much is emitted at a single time, but how much we are exposed to with repeated use, day after day, year after year. It's this long-term use of cell phones that has led researchers to warn about their danger. In one study, for example, the World Health Organization tracked 10,000 cell phone users over the course of 10 years. As reported in the New York Times on November 13, 2010, the data in this study indicated that subjects who used a cell phone 10 or more years doubled the risk of developing brain tumors. Other studies have reached the same conclusion. Perhaps most important is a 2007 study in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine that surveyed all the previous research on cell phone use. It found a consistent pattern of increased risk for developing brain tumors among people who used cell phones for more than 10 years. Alan Marks is one of those people. A 58-year-old real estate developer and father of 3. He talked on his cell phone an hour a day for 23 years. 2 years ago, doctors found a golf ball-sized tumor in his brain. There's no question what caused it, he says. It was my cell phone. And Alan Marks isn't the only person to conclude that he's sick because of his cell phone. Ann Gittleman's 2010 book, Zapped, which deals at length with the health problems of cell phones, catalogs people who developed blinding headaches, dizziness, circulatory problems, nausea, and cancer from the kind of radiation emitted by cell phones. Still not convinced about the potential dangers posed by your constant companion? Take a look then inside the thick manual that comes with your phone. You'll see that all cell phone manufacturers warn against keeping the phone right next to your body. Apple, for example, recommends keeping the iPhone 5/8 of an inch away from your body. Makers of the BlackBerry recommend that you keep their phone a full inch away. Cell phone manufacturers don't publicize this information widely, but they clearly recognize that their products are potentially hazardous. So, what's the solution? As I said earlier, it's not to stop using cell phones altogether. I still use mine on a regular basis, and I can't imagine being without it, and I'm sure you can't imagine being without yours. You can, however, take seriously the risks of cell phones and find a way to minimize those risks. Time and again, experts point out that the single most effective way to reduce the risk is not to press your cell phone against your head while using it. Since the phone emits radiation, the closer you put it to your head, the more radiation you expose yourself to. At the very least, you should hold the phone 1/2 an inch to 1 full inch away from your ear, but ideally you should get in the habit of not putting it up to your head at all. I now use my earbuds almost every time I use my phone. Another option is to use your speakerphone. As with breaking any habit, changing the way you talk on your cell phone may be slightly inconvenient at first, but will soon become second nature. You'll be able to enjoy all the benefits of your constant companion without suffering the fate of Alan Marks. If Marks had known the dangers of prolonged cell phone use, he would have done things a lot differently. I wouldn't have held it to my head, he says. I would have used the headset, I would have used the speakerphone, and I would not have had the problems I had. So, please get in the habit of keeping your cell phone away from your ear when talking, and encourage your friends and family to do the same. Start today with your next phone call and continue every day in the future. We can avoid the slow motion epidemic that doctors and scientists are warning us about, as long as we remember to keep this away from this.
A cold, dark room. It smells disgusting. The creatures in front of you shake uncontrollably, packed one on top of another in tiny wire cages. To eat, they have only crumbs in front of them, and to drink, only a dirty bowl of water. Many have eye problems, ear problems, diseases, and infections. They've never been groomed, they've never been for a walk, and they've never seen the sun. For too many dogs across America, this is how life begins in a puppy mill. Puppy mills, as defined by the Humane Society of the United States, are mass dog breeding operations that take place in shockingly poor conditions. Puppy mill breeders produce puppies for profit, only for profit, with little or no concern for the physical, social, or emotional needs of the dogs. As a dog lover, I was shocked to discover the horrors of puppy mills across the country as I researched this speech. I know from my audience analysis questionnaires that most of you had a dog or another pet while you were growing up, and that you believe they should be treated humanely. Today, I'll show you that puppy mills are not treating animals humanely, and I'll suggest some ways of solving the problem. Puppy mills have been around for a long time, but they've grown dramatically in recent years. The Humane Society estimates that there are more than 10,000 puppy mills currently operating in the United States. According to Stephanie Shane, the Society's Director of Outreach for Companionable Animals, of the 7 to 9 million dogs sold in this country each year, 2 to 4 million come from puppy mills. That's double the number from only a decade ago. Rather than producing the healthy, happy pets that millions of families dream of, puppy mills produce dogs with canine herpes, respiratory infections, parasites, seizures, and E. coli. Dogs that are lucky enough to escape these diseases often have rotten teeth, missing eyes or limbs, hip disorders, skin problems, and a host of other deformities. In addition to suffering from physical problems, dogs in puppy mills are often emotionally unstable. Some are dangerously violent and aggressive. Others are apathetic and lack any desire to interact with people or animals. Because of the overcrowding in puppy mills, some animals literally go crazy and chew off the ears, legs, and tails of other dogs. But you can see for yourself what the dogs have to endure. Here's a picture of a puppy mill provided by the U.S. Humane Society. As you can see, the cages are stacked one on top of another, and the dogs are packed into the cages like sardines into a can. The dogs are not let out to go to the bathroom, so the cages are filled with waste and become breeding grounds for the diseases I mentioned earlier in my speech. You can get a better sense of how disgusting a puppy mill is from this photo, taken after the dogs were removed by animal officials. You can see how narrow the cages are and how they're crammed one against the other. You can see that there's filth and debris everywhere. Finally, take a look at a couple of individual dogs. The first one came from a puppy mill here in Wisconsin. It was so malnourished that it couldn't stand up by itself, and it had lost the fur on almost all of its body. The next dog was in even worse shape. Covered with its own filth, it had a rash of infections and diseases, and it had lost the sight in one eye. Like other puppy mill dogs, it never saw a veterinarian until it was rescued. It's time that we stop the horrors of puppy mills and help dogs and dog owners alike. Solving the problem requires action on two fronts: legislation and individual initiative. The first step is for new laws that will put puppy mills out of business. Current laws, such as the Animal Welfare Act, are ineffective at best. This law only regulates a small number of breeders, leaving countless puppy mills to operate under the radar. Here's the legislation I propose. It's based on a combination of proposals that have been presented in several states. All dog breeders who produce more than 30 puppies a year should be required to register with their state's Department of Agriculture, which would inspect dog breeding facilities just as the health department inspects restaurants. Breeders with dogs in substandard conditions would be dealt with accordingly. A first offense would result in a fine of $3,000. A second offense would result in a fine of $5,000. And a third offense would result in a fine of $10,000 and 90 days in jail, plus permanent loss of the breeder's license in every state of the union. But legislation alone won't do the job. You and I also have a part to play. We have to take the profit out of puppy mills by making sure we don't purchase dogs produced by puppy mills. We can do this by following guidelines laid out by the Humane Society. First, consider adopting a dog from a trusted animal shelter instead of buying a new dog. The animal shelter will make sure the dog is free of physical and behavioral problems. Second, if you decide to buy a new dog, visit the breeder's premises. If the breeder refuses to let you see the premises or wants you to meet somewhere else, don't buy from that breeder. Third, don't buy a dog from a pet store. The Humane Society has found that most dogs in pet stores actually come from puppy mills. And fourth, don't be fooled by advertising. Just because an ad promises that a dog has been, quote, family raised or has a health certificate doesn't mean it's true. This is especially important when it comes to the internet, where there's no way to verify the health of a dog or the trustworthiness of a breeder. In conclusion, I'd like you to imagine your own pet, no matter what kind of animal it might be, living in the conditions endured by dogs in puppy mills. Then imagine your pet living in those conditions day after day, week after week, month after month. Surely you would not want this for your own pet. Yet even as we sit here, millions of dogs are suffering from the horrors of puppy mills. It's time to stop puppy mill breeders from profiting on their cruelty. Even if, as the movie title says, all dogs go to heaven, we should not allow them to start their lives in hell.